I thank you all for joining this important session that we have today on venture capital during the time of COVID-19 outbreak. We have with us Karthik Reddy, co-founder and managing partner at Bloom Ventures. Bloom is a leading early stage investor with an active portfolio of 100 plus startups. Thank you, Karthik, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to offer your perspective on the evolving situation.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Obviously, we've enjoyed all our interactions between ET Prime and Bloom, so I'm happy to contribute in any way I can.
Yeah, thank you. So before we start, we will have a small presentation of some of the data points that we have. We all know there is a capital crunch, and or the startups are anticipating a capital crunch, and the cash flow from the operational revenues have come to a standstill. And the startups are trying to extend the runways, and one option is to cut the general expense and marketing expense, etc. And the other crucial aspect is salary cut and job cut. And we have seen that, in some form, what have come out is at least 24 startups have cut salaries, and and laid off around 1,500 people so far. And this number could probably be slightly conservative. The crowdsourced data by a job portal, Big.Jobs, show that about 60 startups, including unicorns, have laid off people and cut salaries. So while that is on the life of startups, when it comes to the funding scene, that what we are seeing is even before the corona outbreak started impacting the startup scene, there was some bit of a funding slowdown. The Q1 2020, we have the lowest venture capital investment in the past 5 quarters. And given that now that we are in the lockdown, this could probably become, the investments could be lower in the coming quarters. The industry body of Private Equity and Venture Capital Association, which has got 150 members, the survey among its members show that 80% of PEVC firms are finding the investment climate unfavorable. And this week, Karthik was appointed the vice chairperson of IVCA. Congratulations, Karthik, and best wishes. And you are coming in to lead the industry body at a time when there is a big change. The times have changed. The rules of the game have changed, and benchmarks have changed in the past few weeks. So we would like to understand from you, from the venture community point of view, how has it been the past few weeks, and how have you been responding to the situation?
So it's obviously a very sort of tough and uncertain phase. There's no mincing of words there. By the nature of venture capital-backed companies, a lot of the emphasis, a lot of the time, as long as VCs stay interested, is actually in pushing for growth. And a lot of that growth comes at the expense of getting to profitability in the short term. Profitability becomes a long-term objective and not a medium-term objective as well. And as a result, therefore, every company has a higher expense ratio than it should have theoretically, because you're focusing on winning over customers and subsidizing your growth with relatively easy venture capital. Not true of the private equity side of things, by the way, where a lot of emphasis is on entering into yes, funding growth, but into profitable business models. And venture is always experimenting and pushing the boundaries on new business ideas, new business models, which take a very long time to stabilize. And therefore, it's accepted practices to funnel a lot of money and see that and push that, that eventuality out. And then you come to a situation like COVID, and there's a wide spectrum suddenly in everybody's portfolio of companies that are faced with different sets of dangers, right? And I think, broadly, as you know, venture backs B2B and B2C, right? And within both of these segments today, there are large chunks of the economy which have just stalled to almost zero, right? So if you were running Uber or Ola, I'll give more relatable companies than let's say my portfolio, but what everybody uses and understands. Or if you were, one of my companies which services rail customers and bus customers, there's no transportation running today. So everything grinds to almost a zero. And it's a very unnerving feeling when you're riding a high. Your growth has been great. You've had 20, 30 months of growth, and suddenly you have a 0 month and everyone's like locked up. And so I think there have been 3 phases, right? I think one is shock and awe, right? Everybody first reacts to the shock of just business continuity planning, because you've never been in the situation in the last decade of that kind of massive macro shock. Of course, the world has never been in this kind of a situation for maybe many decades. But I'm saying even in the Indian startup scenario, that shock alone took about maybe 2 weeks to recover from, right? Because everyone had to figure out, is everyone set up for work from home? What are the policies? And all of those phases. And then you react and take a wider look at your portfolio and see, what do I need to do to make various parts of my portfolio survive and live through anywhere between 12 to 24 months, right? Because that's how long of uncertainty that's staring at you in the face. And I think a good, depending on each portfolio is different. Axel and a Sequoia and a Matrix and a Bloom, everyone will be different. But every portfolio will have ups and downs, right? So you might have had a very strong model, but for whatever reason, you didn't raise money in the last 2-3 quarters, and suddenly your business looks vulnerable. Whereas you might have had very early days in your business, but you've just raised a new round and you have a lot of time to ponder, and you've suddenly got a competitive advantage over your competition because they don't have money, whereas you do, and you can plot your success. So it's a mixed bag. There's no other way of putting it. I think we're not like distraught. We are taking it with after the first 2 weeks you absorb it and then you say we all need to survive and come out stronger. It's inevitable that there'll be a few casualties, and we're trying to minimize that.
Yeah, one painful reality of this transition or this phase is that there are a lot of job losses, and just want to understand how these kind of situations are dealt with. Of course, everyone is empathetic. But still,
yeah, and it's doubly ironic, by the way. This is the first time, I think, in the history of the planet that people are being laid off on Zoom, right? On Google Hangouts. So, nobody's that cruel or capitalistic that they do layoffs digitally, right? but it is the reality of our time. And we had a founder who reached out to us 4 days ago and said, how does somebody do that? And we need to. So do you know anyone else in the portfolio who has? And I actually wrote into my team chat, and there were 5 other companies which had already laid off people. So this was the 6th at least which had come to our notice. And I think it's and I've been double clicking on this with my portfolio and saying this is a very unique time where you have to be so overweight on communication skills, on transparency, on how much you're able to empathize with people and their lives, and be able to communicate that we're not uniquely we are unique in our existence, but we are actually going through a collective pain, both as a startup ecosystem and worldwide. And so, if the business has to survive, we have to do it in the better interest of the business. So that's broadly the playbook. Each one of them is adopting a slightly different style. It requires multiple conversations. It requires one-on-ones with everybody. And there have been companies which have said, avoided job cuts by opting for pay cuts. And there are interesting debates, and these are happening in town halls and polls, you can imagine, online town halls, where the founders, CEOs actually asked, do you want me to lay off people, or do we collectively take pay cuts? And so there's this socialistic and capitalistic agendas which are portrayed by 2 sides of the organization. And usually the majority, thankfully, has been more socialistic in those kind of situations. I've at least heard of 4 such examples, right? And they've actually opted for pay cuts and postponed the job cuts. So, I think every company will be unique, Manu, because it's a function of how much cash is in the bank.
Yeah.
Can I afford to do this, right? And it's a reality. You have to do what is right for the business.
The Indian startup ecosystem has gone through a couple of cycles at least, and in the funding slowdown that we saw in late 2015, immediately we started seeing that there were a lot of shutdowns, there were a lot of firings, and all kinds of things. So, but compared to that, maybe while the crisis at hand is a lot more severe, a lot more impactful, the consequence may be slightly moderate. At least, we look at one of the cycles that we had in the past. So, can we say our systems, the startup ecosystem, by and large, have become more resilient? Or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think they've become more resilient. I think, as the ecosystem grows, people criticize how much capital has gone into the ecosystem, but the one silver lining always of capital going in is more and more of this ecosystem has gotten trained better, right? Everybody learns how to adapt in a high-paced, high-risk environment. And that number, when we started Bloom, the beginning of the decade was probably 10,000, 20,000 such employees. By the middle of the decade, it was probably 50,000 or 100,000. Now it's probably 3x or 5x of that. So that universe of people know how to deal with far more complexity that's thrown at them, number one. Number two, therefore, it makes them far more resilient on how to deal with these situations. And you get better with every cycle. But I don't think there's any comparison between any macro crisis we've seen historically versus this.
Yeah,
this is very unique. It's unique because the world is on pause, or different parts of the world are on pause at different times. So in some sense, it's a level playing field. And a lot of it had to do with how much you stocked up your bank account in the last 2-3 quarters. Because just that factor of luck gives you a competitive advantage that somebody else in the market does not have, right? Whereas everybody else is in a level playing field in terms of, they'll get talent for cheap, they can continue building. If they have tailwinds, all tailwind sectors should benefit, all headwind sectors will get hit. It's not like one person has a bigger advantage versus the other or not. So I think what will happen is there'll be learning groups and cohorts of subsectors even within the startup ecosystem, right? The cab guys will get talking to each other. The food delivery guys will move to grocery. The e-education guys are going to rock it. And so basically each one of these will now look like little islands which behave a little differently as opposed to classifying the entire ecosystem. But yet I think there's going to be a lot of pain. 60-70% of the ecosystem is going to hurt. And it's going to take a good 18-24 months to repair this. And all VCs like us who have exposure are going to fight very hard to save what we have, as opposed to be excited about what we might want to fund. That's still a limited universe if you're starting tomorrow morning as a business, versus how much effort went into building 9 or 10 or 15 years in some cases of startup portfolios. So we're going to work very hard on trying to see them to their right end state rather than abandoning them. So we have to get, all capital has to get resilient, all founders have to get resilient, and hopefully the teams also sort of keep pace.
Coming to the tactical aspects of the situation, when we speak to many of your peers in the industry, one thing that's coming up is there are a lot of working capital lines, bridge funding, drip funding, everything that's thrown open. But how far and how long? Is it enough to tide over the situation, or to what extent that can help us?
I think all of those can buy 3 to 6 months. Right. I think they can soften short-term shocks to the working capital cycle or the balance sheet position of each one of these companies. And what you're trying to do is protect whatever. Actually, what is happening is you're trying to protect what you have in the bank, right? These are not lifelines in the sense that just because you got that, somehow you're going to miraculously be profitable or sustainable in June. What it allows, though, Manu, is the ability to postpone your absolute critical point in your operations by 3 months or 6 months. It gives you breathing space, right? And I think these are all liquidity and breathing spaces of one kind or the other. And that allows for the cap table to regroup and say, where can we raise some money, right? It allows for somebody who's sitting on the fence and wanted to cut a check. We have at least half a dozen companies of that kind, where people were waiting to cut a check, but all conversations suddenly died March 15th. Yeah. Now, you hope that of those, I would actually believe half of them have tailwinds. They will actually look very good even in June. The problem is, like I had a Chinese investor on the call yesterday who said, until the lockdown lifts, I can't even have a conversation. Okay. And he was looking at one of these companies of ours. So I think you're trying to buy that 3 to 6 months of relief at this point, I'll be very honest. Beyond that, you need to find a sustenance measure, in my humble opinion, for 21 months. So we're calling it internally the catch 21 problem. 7 quarters, 3 months each, 21 months, right? If you can't see the light of day on Jan 1st, 2022, all bets are off, right? Because you don't know how long this thing's going. No expert in the world can tell you predictably how long we are in this trenches for.
Okay, after any downturn generally triggers some kind of a consolidation drive. We will see a lot of distress buyouts. We have it's just 4 weeks or 5 weeks, and we have not started seeing so many of such deals, but many of them could probably in the making. So you could probably give some sense of.
I think there are going to be 3 types of consolidation.
Yeah.
One is the headwinds are so strong and you have no capital to survive beyond 3-6 months that there's no chance in hell that you're getting funded even in June or July, right? And your runway was only till September, August, September, June, July, whatever it may have been. So you're in trouble. So, you say, oh, I was not fated to build this startup. Let me figure out how to find it a good home, right? And that good home comes in 2 parts. If you have a certain scale of business where people have put in 5, 10, 15, 20, $50 million of capital, they're not going to let it go to zero. So there, everybody gets involved. The investors get involved, the founder gets involved. You have hundreds of employees. You don't want them all to lose their jobs. You can't shut her down in some sense. So those are going to be the most active conversations to see, can we find a meaningful, merger or an acquisition for this company. The challenge is, unlike any other time in history, the best of the companies that can afford to buy you are also in wartime. There is no company exempt from wartime, right? He's not sitting peacefully and saying everything is hunky-dory. I'm sitting in office and chatting with 6 guys about how I can acquire this company. He has to conclude an acquisition of this nature on Zoom, right? So it's a very unique time where these conversations are probably being enabled. If there are commonalities of business, there are commonalities of interest, they will get accelerated. It's inevitable that there will be a lot of these. Unfortunately, I feel there will be a lot more of these acqui-hire like situations where there isn't much traction to show. You have 20 candidates in peacetime, but in this wartime, 16 of them are fighting their own battles. So they're saying, I don't want to take on more. In a regular peacetime, you would have had 16 candidates look at you. Now you have 4. So you're going to be at the mercy of whatever they offer you. So the valuations are going to be suppressed. And if you'll be grateful sometimes if you can have your companies find a good home, your employees find a good job. And the mega mergers, I can't relate to them. I don't have too many unicorns in my portfolio, to be honest. I just have an academy and Grey Orange at half a billion. So it's new territory. I don't know how their boards work. I don't know how their thinking works. There are 30 of them, as you know, 30, give or take a few. A lot of them are cash guzzlers. So they have to figure out, do they have the ability to raise cash for 30 unicorns to sustain their burn for another 2 years? And if that doesn't happen, there might be some consolidation even at that level.
Yeah. You have just said, the bridge funding can probably sustain companies for maybe 6 months. So post that, just in case these kind of consolidation efforts do not work out, in many cases they don't. So are we going to see that there can be a lot of shutdowns as well going forward?
Yeah, I think so. But I think I think also it's a kind of a unique time because everyone, as I said, is feeling the pain. I think they're going to be far less aggressive in the way they deal with this. They're going to be a little bit more passionate about how they deal with this, right? So, but as I said, even those big companies, let's take an Amazon, a Google, a Walmart, which is Flipkart. You take even these large companies who can potentially have large balance sheets, can actually buy a lot of good assets in the market today. Even they're just like figuring out their lives for this 1 month, 2 months, right? So even those folks can't step in and do wonders today for your asset if you were going to sell it to them. And I think that mood will shift the minute you start seeing people walking around. Literally, right? Right now, you look out of your window, you don't see people walking around. It's a mindset shift, which is not easy to engineer, right? You can't go and say, let me go buy a company when you can't get your car out of your garage, right? And so I think that mindset shift, when it happens in June, I think the second half of the year will be a lot more meaningful acquisitions. So it comes back, Manu, to being able to survive as long as you need to be able to get the best outcome. And I think the bridges are going to help on that front, right? There's no guarantees, but I think a lot more of that will happen. But you're right. There's the funnel is always very, very sharp. If there are this many companies on top of the funnel, not all of them can be bought and absorbed. A few of them are going to fall by the wayside.
Okay. So, while, that's one aspect, one thing that we have, in the presentation that, we have been discussing about the funding scene. So already Q1 was the lowest in terms of the venture capital investment that we have seen in the 5 quarters. Of course, we had a bullish, period just prior to that. And so what's your outlook for of course, there is no brainer, it's going to be bad, but how bad that can be?
I feel the bulk of the capital is either going to go to about, if you looked at the entire startup universe, if you look at new company formation, right? I don't think it's necessarily going to be a priority for a lot of people to look into sectors which are anyway going to face COVID headwinds for another year or two. So if you came to me with any form of travel startup this year, what's my compulsion to invest in it? I'm going to postpone that decision to next year. So that holds for both new companies and legacy companies which are in headwind sectors, for one. Now, amongst the rest, the existing cap table will try very hard to protect their best companies. If you believe that they're great founders, it's only a year, it's a blip. Once the market gets back to normal, by next June, July, they'll be rocking in 2021. I'm going to get capital in to protect it as much as I can, right? And the tailwind sectors like education, digital, media, entertainment, those are probably going to get the fresh money. So what you have is a lot more money in certain sectors, but it's a very small percentage of the market. A lot of money securing your own positions. So it's not going to be where there was $100 million round, it's not going to be 100 million, it's going to be 40. Because you're not trying to raise for 2 years in glorious growth. You're trying to raise to protect yourself for 4 to 5 quarters, 6 quarters, right? So, and though they will raise money, they will probably end up raising 40-50% of what they would have typically raised from fresh investors, because your existing cap tables have limited reserves. And then a good 50% of the portfolio of like usual startup formation will get no capital, almost no capital in mind, right? And so if you do the sort of weighted average on that, I would think a shrinkage of 50% is very easy, right? I don't think you're going to have a much better year than about 50% of capital. Not on a quarterly. I don't think in quarters. In our business is so long term. We think on a more annualized basis. And next year it'll come back from the 50 upwards. My take is until Q3, Q4 of next year, you're not going to see the levels you saw in December 19, last quarter of 19, because I don't think there's a compelling reason. See, conspicuous consumption will be on hold, right? Travel is on hold. New jewelry, fashion, discretionary consumption, I think will unfortunately be on a hold for some time, right? Real estate, new automobiles. So people will take a pause. And so if that capital formation is not, if that capital expense is not there in the market, why would people pump money into those startups? They can build through lean, profitable, but they don't need to blow up money in acquiring customers or marketing and things like that. Even if right now, as we're seeing advertising, some companies have the courage to advertise right now. Advertising rates are so cheap, so you don't need to spend as much money. So that cyclical effect will ensure that why are you raising money when you don't need to spend as much? I think that will rationalize the capital raising also. I think it's going to take 6 quarters to come back.
Okay. So to add to that, an individual question. So, are you still looking at companies? Will you be investing in the short term? So,
it's a tough one. No, I think I would say best case scenario, we would be at about same thing that I just said a little while ago. Compared to new portfolio formation, if I was going to do X, I would probably do 0.4X this year, 0.5X. So not more than 40-50% of what I budgeted. And this quarter is going to be really rough. And then maybe we'll start applying our head as a team to say what will we play once lockdown ends, and what kind of companies will we invest in. I think founders who are sitting on the sidelines, very strong founders, and who are building new startups, will jump at this opportunity and come up with new ideas, because for the first time, it's like you've done like a reset on the world, and a brand new set of ideas is emerged, right? And so it doesn't happen usually when you're going quarter to quarter to quarter in your life. It happens when you do a shutdown like this and open shutters again after a month, right? So I think both of those are still going to tempt us to look at pipeline actively, but we probably end up doing half of what we would have typically done in a year. New companies. A lot of the effort is going to be into taking whatever little capital we can raise and give it to our existing companies.
okay.
So that is going to take up enough of our time and effort and capital as well. So we will see the cap tables at the end of the year. It will say that Bloom has made 15, 20 investments. My reality is, I think 75% of that will be into existing companies.
Okay. So the other thing is, what are your LPs, limited partners, telling you? So how are they looking at the situation? And
it's a good question. The usual quick bullet point rules of thumb. They're also still learning. They're getting data points from all their GPs. Usually, it's not an India shock thing. They have to absorb data from China, India, Israel, Europe, and US. I can sense that we finished most of our key conversations in the last 10 days. And my sense is that they're still grappling with what the impact of this might be. And how much. So first thing they asked is, how much liquidity should I plan for? What is your year going to look like? How much are you going to draw down from me? Second thing is, don't try to be brave and superheroic and add portfolio when you don't know what's happening in your existing portfolio. So, right. Third is, don't get emotional and back stuff just because it's dying, right? Because it's life, right? So don't and double down and as much as you can on the winners. If you think this is tailwind sectors, like we have a couple of things in agri which are doing very well. We have a couple of things in education which are doing very well. They're saying, yeah, don't pause, just double down on them, take more stake, because this kind of a moment in history will not come. The outsider is not looking, but the insider has immense belief. So these are approximately the 4 or 5 points. I think they're not like paranoid yet, because I think there are silver linings in every portfolio. And they're hopeful that the world's not going to be shut for too long. So when it comes back, some of these things will hit a little bit of a curve back up. So that is their belief.
Yeah. And we referred to the IVC survey in the, when we, presented the data points. So one of the other points which we did not show there, that was about the VC firms. The 90% of the VC firms are, have deferred their exit plans. So can you throw light on the?
Yeah, no, I think so I should have covered it in the LP point. I think LPs are going to be respectful of the fact that you shouldn't rush timelines at this point, right? Don't put artificial pressure on the ability to exit, because capital markets are just not conducive for that, right? So if you have distress situations and you have to exit, of course you'll get the exit, you'll get what you can. Probably 80% of those cases, by the way, even in India, even historically, have been stock acquisitions. So you're not going to get any exit, you're just going to get somebody else's stock, right? And you're going to be stuck in that stock for 2 years more than you thought you would be. the reality is none of these are going to go to capital markets very soon in terms of their ability to sell for large amounts of cash in an M&A or go IPO, right? That was anyways challenging in India. Now it's gotten doubly challenging because the markets have taken a little bit of a beating. So I think the good news is, again, always looking for silver linings in a time like this, right? So the good news is that I think the market will adjust to the demand for profitability and the demand for sustainable businesses has just come and hit every one of us. So what we could have potentially postponed for a couple of years, we'll accelerate a lot faster. That said, growth will be tempered, and you cannot accelerate your exits per se. So most managers will go to their LPs and say, hey, the world large is writing off a year or two, so please budget that for us as well in terms of timelines to exits. And when you actually timeline exits that way, IRRs get hit, right? IRR is a nasty animal. It compounds at at the same rate every year. And if you take a year off, suddenly your IRR just drops a lot, right? Because of the compounding effect. So it will hurt IRRs from this vintage, but I honestly feel, thankfully, because India is not a one-off economy and it's a global phenomenon and everybody's hurting, I don't think we're going to be hugely disadvantaged by that comparison. People will be kind.
Okay. So now we will start taking the questions. The one question that has come up is about the valuation, the correction in the valuation, to what extent are you seeing the corrections?
So we've seen, I think the easy answer on that without belaboring the point is 20 to 30% is where 80 percentile of the market is at. There are some who are able to hold their current valuation because their business is doing well, and some which are getting even deeper discounts because their business is not going to do well. But I think if you take 70, 80 percentile, the middle 70, 80, the range would be 20 to 30% drop in valuation.
Okay. So the other question is from Ikansh Khatar. So that's about what will be your view of fintech space? What are the key opportunities and challenges in the current scenario?
So surprisingly, I think it's going to be one of the more resilient sectors, especially from when you add the word tech. All of us do acknowledge that fintech is just cool sounding. It's basically a more digitized version of a financial services business. And there lies the key element, right? The fact that digitization was inevitable of money flows and how any transaction layer that you add to money flows, whether it's insurance, whether it is, however you productize it, whether that's insurance, whether it's savings, whether it's loans, whether it's working capital, I think all the inefficiencies of that value chain needed to go away over a period of time as the government enabled more and more regularization of the economy, brought more and more things into the formal economy. The opportunity was going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And that opportunity is likely to be better handled by a new age fintech company than the regular bank, right? Because the processes, the systems, the way they onboard, the way they disburse, the way they run credit, everything's a little outdated, right? And they might be able to adapt, but they will depend on new fintech companies. Now, what is this COVID moment created for financial services, as an example, or for that matter, healthcare, or for that matter, education? They've actually rapidly fast forwarded, the need to be able to deliver these services more and more on a digital basis. Because today you can't talk to your customer if you are a non-digital, or a customer cannot interact with their capital if they're not digital already. And these are, I think, remarkable changes we are going to see in these three sectors at least: financial services, healthcare, education. And fintech is no different, I think, than anything else. It's probably the easiest because actually money can be virtual. At least the others, the service has to be physical in some part, right? Education and the healthcare. Whereas in the case of money, why do you need to be physically present anywhere? And so I think that acceleration is going to, I would argue that this is a bigger moment than demonetization for a lot of subsectors, and fintech is right on top of that. So we have seen challenges in certain business models in the short term. We have an insurance distributor called Turtle Mint, and their distribution was through agents who went and met their customers offline. And you have to now change everybody's behavior, customer and agent, to talk to each other online. And they've enabled that in 4 weeks, and now the volumes are beginning to pick up. I think these are irreversible changes. A person will not go to 15 different homes to sell insurance anymore. He's just going to actively engage their customer base digitally, right? We have a company called Small Case, which does portfolios of stocks. Their volumes in the first half of April have matched their best month ever in the last 2 years, right? And so people are saying, hey, let me evaluate what better options there are to invest, and they're actually picking a new asset class. And so on and so forth. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting time.
We have a few anonymous attendee questions. Basically, one is about where do you think major cost reduction will happen in startups? Is it in layoffs, marketing, or in some other area?
I think sales is more than marketing, in the sense that, yes, marketing of discretionary type. If your customer is not ready to buy, you shouldn't be marketing. So again, it's very difficult to give unqualified answer. So the qualified answer is, if your customer is not listening to you right now, why are you marketing, right? If the customer is in shock. If you're doing B2B marketing, for example, a lot of customers are not even prepared to read a mail that comes from you. So why are you marketing? People costs are unfortunately a necessity, because in a lot of startups, they compromise. The younger the startup, the higher the proportion of the aggregate cost. So you can cut everything else to the bone, and if you're sitting there with just your team without any other cost, you still sometimes 70% of your monthly cost is your payroll. So if you really want sometimes a chunky reduction in cost, it has to come from payroll. And payrolls can be done either by pay cuts or layoffs. And unfortunately, one of them have to be the panacea sometimes. And by the way, every company is relooking at wasteful costs, right? They're renegotiating with landlords. They're trying to cut rents. They're trying to cut server costs. They're trying to cut all sorts of vague technology tools that they were using, of which 30-40% redundancy might be there. There is not a nook or a corner that will be not explored from a cost-cutting perspective in this time.
Okay. The other question is on, so are liquidity preferences going to save the day for VCs?
The day you exercise a liquidity preference, it's never saving the day. Yes, you save your capital, but it's the worst part of the job. You write it into a SHA to be able to make your money back. But it's not a great feeling for a VC to ever exercise liquidity. You know that things have not gone well when you exercise liquidity. Yes, to the extent that it will protect capital, you're absolutely right. We can't be overly sympathetic towards a founder and say, hey, you work 5 years or 7 years of your life, tough luck, or rather, great, pat them on the back and pay them a lot of money for doing that if we haven't made our capital back, right? That's the rules of engagement here, right? We took risk with hard dollars. They took it with hard sweat. And so they will always, by the way, it's a balanced action. I don't think private equity imposes it far more rigidly. Venture, I think there is always a little bit of a balance. If we can live with 70% of our money because of the offer that's come, sometimes we will forego the liquidity preference because the founders have to make something to be able to continue. Otherwise, the acquirer might not even buy, right? They might say, I'm giving only X. You guys figure out how to solve it. And X might be less than the amount of money that went in. Maybe 1.5X might have gone in. So whether you get X in your hand or 0.9X, it's not life-changing. So sometimes you'll take the 0.1X and give it to the founders. So I think the day you exercise liquidity preference, it's not a happy situation for anybody. Everyone's fighting for the last scrap. That's been my learning over a decade. So that's my answer to that.
The last question is on the, we are seeing that, the community is making representations to the government for tax waivers and, all kinds of support. So what's your view on that? And can that help?
See, I think the community is doing it because, unlike the US where the SBA or, the equivalent of the social security system or unemployment claims, the entire infrastructure around being able to disburse money to somebody who can apply online, get it across, it's very well established. In the Indian context, we don't have that infrastructure layer at all, right? So the government can do direct benefits into the, to the poorer sections of society by giving them X rupees and giving them grain, salt, because the ration systems were set up. I don't think that's necessarily true of SMBs and corporates. So you always need an agent to represent them, right? So the banking system, changes that were announced by the RBI today will allow the banks a lot more liquidity and freedom to be able to talk to their customers. RBI and the government are not going to talk to XYZ corporation and say, I'll solve your problem, right? They're saying, I've given freedom to the banks to be able to engage with you. So similarly, the venture capital community or the private equity community or IVCA will go and lobby for its own existence, to be very honest, right? And there are tertiary effects. So people have to recognize that it's not for our greed and self-preservation. I have got at least 5 mails of various kinds from whether it is Uber, Ola, or Dunzo or others saying, hey, our partners are hit, right? So we're putting funds together for them. So essentially, please don't understand, the VC ecosystem as self-serving. We're actually enabling marketplaces like this country never enabled before, right? You didn't have 200,000 cab drivers or 500,000 cab drivers dependent on ferrying people around historically. They were either with private cab services or they were not. Similarly, the number of Kirana stores that will get, benefits from a digital provider or from somebody who can do home delivery is just enormous. So I think there are tertiary effects by what the digital economy can deliver to their customers. So I'm not talking about consumers, I'm talking about merchants that they service, I'm talking about businesses that they service. So we feel it's our responsibility to go and enable that continuation, right? And of course, it is somewhat self-serving. Our portfolio companies have to survive and thrive for that to happen, and our capital is at risk. So we will go and see what we can lobby for. It's not easy. I think there's not going to be too many freebies. There are going to be some grants, some concessions, some loans being given against GST refunds, things like that, which are very practical. Because in India, if you don't have a practical way of assessing this, nothing will get done. There's no freebies. We're not going to get money into a bank from any entity, don't worry. It's going to be very, very structured sort of disbursement.
Okay. Thanks. That brings us to a close. So it has been a very engaging and very candid conversation. Thank you, Karthik, and thank you, participants, for joining us. ET Prime e-conferences, we will have many more in the pipeline. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Manu, and thanks, Shishir and the team at ET Prime for the opportunity. I hope it was useful for your viewers. Thank you.